The door slammed. 19. Vivian Brennan stood in the snow, her breath coming in white clouds that disappeared into the darkness. Her hand, still raised from knocking, trembled violently. Not from cold, though the Montana winter had long since stolen the feeling from her fingers. The trembling came from somewhere deeper, somewhere that knew how to count doors closing in her face. 19 doors, 19 rejections, 19 voices saying the same thing in different words. We don't help strangers, not in our condition. Try the church, try somewhere else. Try not to die on our doorstep. The last thought was her own. Dark humor had become her only companion on this walk through hell. That, and the child growing inside her, pressing against ribs that showed too clearly through skin that had forgotten what warmth felt like. Vivian looked down at her boots. The left one had blood seeping through a crack in the leather. Frostbite, probably. She'd stopped feeling her toes 3 days ago, stopped caring 2 days after that. The body had a way of prioritizing pain, and right now, her frozen feet ranked somewhere below the hollow ache in her stomach and the knife-sharp terror that Will Brennan was somewhere behind her, getting closer with every hour she wasted standing still. Move, her mind commanded. The baby needs you to move. But her legs had other ideas. They'd carried her through 18 towns across 3 territories, through snowstorms that should have killed her. Now, staring at the 19th closed door, they simply gave up. The strength that had sustained her through weeks of walking, begging, surviving, finally ran out. Vivian's knees hit the snow first, then her hands. Then everything went sideways and the white ground rose up to meet her face with a softness that felt almost kind. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was a light, warm and golden, spilling from windows maybe 100 yards away. A ranch house, large and solid, smoke curling from its chimney into the night sky. Behind her closed eyelids, Vivian sent up a prayer to a God she wasn't sure listened anymore. Please, just this once, let someone open the door. Then the cold pulled her under, and there was nothing but silence. Henry Dalton heard the sound over the wind. Not much of a sound, really. Just a soft thud, like a sack of grain hitting the ground. But something about it made him look up from the horse he was grooming, made him walk to the barn door and peer out into the storm. Nothing. Just snow and darkness and the eternal howling that came with December in Montana territory. He turned back to his work. Juniper, his late wife's mare, nickered softly and nuzzled his shoulder. The gesture was familiar, comforting. For 2 years this horse had been his only real companion. Joe ran the house, Sam ran the ranch hands, but Juniper understood grief in a way humans pretended to. I know, girl, Hank murmured, running his scarred hands through her mane. I heard it too. Something made Hank look toward the gate. Not intuition, just the restlessness of a man who couldn't sleep, whose nightly routine included checking the property one last time. He grabbed his coat and headed out into the snow, Juniper following at his heels, as she always did when he made evening rounds. The cold hit him like a fist. Montana winters were unforgiving, but tonight felt personal. The kind of cold that found every gap in your coat, every weakness in your resolve. Hank pulled his collar up and squinted through the swirling white. He was halfway to the gate when he saw it. Juniper trotted beside him, her warm presence steady and familiar. A shape in the snow, dark against white, not moving. His heart, which had learned to beat quietly after Ruth died, suddenly hammered against his ribs. Not again, please God, not again. He broke into a run, boots crunching through drifts. Juniper matched his pace, her steady presence beside him. When he reached the shape, the mare lowered her head, her warm breath creating small clouds over what Hank could now see was a person, a woman. Collapsed face down, one arm stretched out like she'd been reaching for something. Hank dropped to his knees beside her, his hands already moving to check for a pulse. His fingers found her neck pressed against cold skin and waited. There, faint, but there. A heartbeat. He turned her over as gently as his shaking hands would allow. Her face emerged from shadow, pale and young, framed by dark hair matted with ice. but it was what he saw when his eyes traveled lower that made his breath catch. She was pregnant, very pregnant. 8 months, maybe more. The hammer in his chest became a drum. 2 years ago he'd come home from a supply run to find Ruth in their bedroom, the midwife shaking her head, blood on sheets that would never come clean. Ruth had gone into labor alone. Something had gone wrong. The baby had been breech. By the time Hank arrived, by the time he'd ridden hell-bent for the doctor in Copper Ridge, it was too late. Both of them gone. Wife and child. Gone while he'd been buying fence posts and coffee, and now delivered to his doorstep by a blizzard and a horse with better instincts than he deserved another pregnant woman. Another chance to fail. Or another chance to succeed. Hank made his decision in the space of a heartbeat. He slid his arms under the woman's shoulders and knees lifted her against his chest and stood. She weighed almost nothing, too little for someone carrying a child. Starvation, his mind diagnosed. Exposure, dehydration. How long had she been walking? Joe. His voice carried over the wind as he strode toward the house. Josephine. The front door flew open. Joe Parker stood silhouetted against the warm light from inside her tall frame, wrapped in an apron, her gray hair escaping its bun. "Henry Dalton, what in the name of—" Her words died when she saw what he carried. "Sweet mercy, bring her in, quickly now." The warmth of the house hit them like a wall. Hank crossed the threshold, Juniper following close behind until Joe shooed her back with practiced firmness. The housekeeper was already moving her hands, gesturing toward the stairs. "Guest room. I'll get water heating. Don't just stand there. Move." Hank took the stairs 2 at a time. The woman in his arms stirring slightly. A small sound escaped her lips. Not quite a word, more like a whimper. The guest room sat at the end of the hall, as far from Ruth's locked bedroom as the house allowed. Joe kept it ready, always had, even though visitors to Dalton Ranch were rare. The bed was made with clean quilts, a fire already laid in the hearth. Hank placed the woman on the bed with a gentleness that surprised him. His hands, used to rough work and rougher animals, remembered how to be careful. He stepped back as Joe swept in with an armful of blankets and a basin of water. "Out," Joe commanded. "I can help." "You can wait downstairs. This isn't work for men." "Joe, I've delivered 50 colts. I can—" The housekeeper's gray eyes fixed on him with an expression that had been cutting through his protests since he was 10 years old. "This isn't a horse, Henry. This is a woman, a pregnant woman who's been through Lord knows what. She doesn't need you gawking while I tend to her. Now out. I'll call if there's need." Hank opened his mouth to argue, saw the futility, and retreated. But he didn't go far, just to the hallway, where he could pace and listen and feel utterly useless. Through the partly open door he could hear Joe's gentle murmuring, the splash of water, the rustle of fabric. And then, faint but unmistakable, the woman's voice. She was delirious, fever probably. The words came in fragments, disconnected and desperate. "Will please don't—" A pause, the sound of Joe's soothing response. "I didn't steal it. It's my inheritance, my father's—" Another pause, then more urgently. "David tried to help. God, David, I'm so sorry. It's my fault. He's dead because of me." Hank pressed closer to the door, his ear nearly against the frame. "If you find me, you'll kill us both. I know you will. You said you would." The last words came out as a sob, raw and broken, then silence broken only by Joe's low, comforting sounds. Hank stood frozen in the hallway. His mind raced, putting pieces together. Will, David, inheritance, threats of death. She wasn't a widow as he'd first assumed. She was running from someone named Will, someone who'd threatened to kill her and her unborn child, running to nowhere until she'd collapsed at his gate. The door opened wider. Joe emerged, her face grave. "She's stable for now, but Henry—" The housekeeper's voice dropped lower. "She's been starving. Weeks, maybe, and there's old bruises under the new, healed ones around her ribs, her arms. Someone's been hurting this girl for a long time." The rage that filled Hank's chest was immediate and fierce. He'd always despised men who raised hands to women. His father had taught him that such men were cowards, lower than the mud on your boots. The thought that someone had hurt this fragile creature now lying in his guest room made his fists clench. "The baby," he managed. "Strong from what I can tell. Moving. That's a good sign. But she needs food, rest, warmth. If she'd walked much longer—" Joe didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. "I'll get Sam to ride for the doctor." "Not in this storm. Nobody's riding anywhere tonight. We'll manage. I've birthed enough babies in my time." Joe's hand touched his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "She'll live, Henry. Both of them will. You got her here in time. In time." 2 words that had haunted him for 2 years. With Ruth, he'd been too late. This time, by grace or luck, or the instincts of a horse, he'd been in time. "What do we do now?" he asked. Joe studied his face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there made her nod, as if confirming something she'd suspected. Now we give her shelter until she's well enough to tell us her story. And then," she paused, "then we decide what kind of men we are. The kind who turn away trouble, or the kind who stand against it." "I know what kind of man I am, Joe. Do you?" "You've been hiding from life for 2 years, Henry. Maybe this is God's way of dragging you back into it." Before he could respond, she'd turned and disappeared back into the room, closing the door with a soft but final click. Hank stood alone in the hallway, listening to the storm rage outside and the quieter storm building inside his chest. He'd built walls after Ruth died. Walls between himself and the world, between himself and anything that might hurt him again. Those walls had kept him safe. Numb but safe. Now a stranger lay in his guest room. A pregnant, desperate stranger who'd been beaten and threatened and driven into a blizzard with nowhere else to go. And something in those walls was starting to crack. Morning came late and gray. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world buried in white. Hank had spent the night in his study, unable to sleep, watching the ceiling and listening for sounds from upstairs. Near dawn, he'd finally dozed off in his chair. He woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of boots on the stairs. Sam Ortiz appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. The ranch hand was Hank's age, but looked older, years of sun and hard work having carved lines deep into his brown skin. He held his hat in both hands, turning it nervously. "Boss, Joe says we got a guest." "We do. She gonna be all right?" "Joe thinks so." Sam nodded, but something in his expression said there was more. "What is it, Sam?" The ranch hand shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Was in town yesterday, before the storm, picking up supplies." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Saw this posted at the general store." Hank took the paper, unfolded it, and felt his blood go cold. Reward $200. Vivian Brennan wanted for theft of marital property and abandonment of lawful husband. The sketch was rough but recognizable. Dark hair, delicate features. Young. It could have been the woman upstairs. Below the description, in bold letters, "Contact Sheriff William Brennan, Silver Creek, Colorado Territory." Hank read it twice, his jaw tightening with each word. Theft of marital property. As if a woman could steal from her own husband. As if leaving made her a criminal. And the name at the bottom, Sheriff William Brennan. Her husband was a lawman. A man with authority connections, the weight of the law behind him. A man who'd posted a bounty on his pregnant wife like she was an escaped prisoner. "Boss?" Sam's voice was quiet. "What do you want me to do with that?" Hank looked at the wanted poster, at the face that now had a name. Vivian Brennan. He crossed to the fireplace where embers from last night's fire still glowed. Without hesitation, he tossed the poster into the hearth. The paper caught, immediately curling and blackening, the words turning to ash. "I didn't see anything," Hank said, his voice flat. "Did you?" A slow smile spread across Sam's face. "See what, boss?" The 2 men stood in silence, watching the last of the poster burn. Outside, a horse whinnied, Juniper probably sensing the morning feeding time. "Sam," Hank said quietly. If anyone comes around asking questions about a woman, we don't know nothing about no woman. Ranch has been quiet all winter, just us and the cattle. Good man. You know, Sam hesitated. Sheriff or not, any man who puts a price on his wife's head ain't worth the badge he wears. Whatever she did, she probably had cause. Hank thought about the bruises Joe had described, the terror in Vivian's delirious voice, the desperation that would drive a pregnant woman into a blizzard. I think you're right. You want me to keep an eye out in town, I mean. See if anyone's asking around, please. Sam settled his hat back on his head and turned to leave. At the door he paused. Boss, it's good. What you're doing. Ruth would have approved. The words hit harder than Hank expected. Ruth, who'd never turned away anyone in need. Ruth, who'd made him promise to always help those who couldn't help themselves. Ruth, who would have taken Vivian in without a second thought. Thanks, Sam. When the ranch hand was gone, Hank poured himself coffee and stood at the window. The sun was trying to break through clouds, casting long shadows across the snow. Somewhere out there, a man named William Brennan was looking for his wife. A sheriff with authority and anger, and God knew what else driving him. And here in Hank's house, that wife lay sleeping, unaware that her husband had already put a price on her head, unaware that Hank had just committed himself to hiding her. The smart thing would be to send her on her way as soon as she was killed. The safe thing. The thing that wouldn't bring trouble to his door. But Hank hadn't done the smart thing in a long time, and safety had cost him everything he loved. Maybe it was time to be reckless. Vivian woke to softness. After weeks of frozen ground and barn floors and one terrifying night in a snowdrift, waking to something soft was so unexpected that for a moment she thought she'd died. This was heaven probably, warm and quiet and gentle. Then her baby kicked hard and heaven became a bedroom, a beautiful bedroom, clean, warm, with actual curtains on the windows and a real quilt covering her body. The kind of room she hadn't seen since before she'd married Will and discovered that his charm hid a monster. She sat up slowly, testing her body for damage. Her feet ached, sharp pains shooting up her calves. Frostbite, definitely. But she could wiggle her toes, which meant she'd probably keep them. Her hands were bandaged, the skin underneath tender but healing. Someone had tended her carefully. The door opened. A woman entered, tall and gray-haired, carrying a tray that smelled like food. Real food. Vivian's stomach clenched painfully. Good. You're awake. The woman's voice was brisk but not unkind. She set the tray on the bedside table. I'm Josephine Parker. Joe, I keep house here. And you are... Vivian's throat was too dry for speech. Joe seemed to notice pouring water from a pitcher into a glass and handing it over. The water was cold and perfect, and Vivian drank it in 3 gulps. Vivian, she managed finally. Vivian. Grace. The lie came automatically. Never use your real last name. Will had taught her that ironically when he'd been explaining how to hide money from tax collectors. Well, Miss Grace, you gave us quite a scare. Collapsing in a snowstorm when you're 8 months pregnant isn't recommended behavior. I didn't have much choice. So I gathered. Joe's sharp eyes missed nothing. You've been talking in your sleep, quite a bit actually. Vivian's heart stuttered. What did I say? Enough to know you're running from something, or someone. Joe sat in the chair beside the bed, her posture relaxed, but her gaze intense. I won't pry, but I will say this, you're safe here. Mr. Dalton made that clear. Whatever trouble you're running from, it stops at this door. Mr. Dalton, Henry Dalton, owns this ranch. He's the one who found you, carried you inside himself. Vivian looked down at her bandaged hands. A stranger had saved her life. A stranger was offering her shelter. After 19 doors, after weeks of rejection and fear, someone had finally said yes. The gratitude that welled up was so intense, it hurt. I don't know how to thank him. You can start by eating. Joe pushed the tray closer. Eggs, toast, bacon, more food than Vivian had seen in a month. And then you can tell Mr. Dalton yourself. He's been pacing outside this door since dawn wearing a hole in my good rug. As if summoned, there was a soft knock. Joe rose and opened the door. A man stood in the hallway. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair shot through with gray at the temples. His face was weathered-lined with work and grief, but his eyes were kind. Blue-gray like winter's sky. This was Henry Dalton, her rescuer. "Miss Grace is awake," Joe announced, "and surprisingly ungrateful for someone who nearly froze to death." "I am grateful," Vivian protested. "I just don't—" "She's teasing," the man said. His voice was deep rough from disuse, but gentle. Joe's sense of humor takes getting used to. He stepped into the room but kept his distance, as if aware that his size might be intimidating. "I'm Hank. Henry, but everyone calls me Hank. Vivian. But you already knew that. I heard you say it. While you were—" He stopped clearly, unsure how to phrase it. "Delirious with fever," Joe supplied helpfully, babbling about all sorts of interesting things. Vivian's cheeks burned. What had she said? Had she mentioned Will by name? The inheritance. David's death. As if reading her panic, Hank spoke quickly. "It doesn't matter what you said. What matters is you're alive, and you're welcome to stay here until you're well enough to travel. No questions asked. No payment expected." It was too good, too kind. Vivian had learned that when something seemed too good, it usually was. "Why," the word came out sharper than she intended. "Why would you help me?" "You don't know me. I could be anyone. A thief, a liar? Why risk taking me in?" Hank was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried weight. "Because 2 years ago my wife died. She was pregnant. Something went wrong while I was away. By the time I got home it was too late to save either of them." He met her eyes, and Vivian saw pain there. Old pain worn smooth, but never healed. "I won't make that mistake again. I won't stand by while someone needs help. Not ever again." The raw honesty in his words took her breath. This wasn't charity. This was penance. "I'm sorry," Vivian said softly, "about your wife." "So am I." He straightened, and the vulnerability vanished behind something more practical. "Now eat. Joe's cooking is the best in 3 territories, and you look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks." "I haven't." "Then that's where we start." He turned to leave, paused at the door. "And Miss Grace, whatever you're running from, whatever brought you here, it stays outside. This is a safe place, I give you my word." He left before she could respond. Joe followed, but not before giving Vivian a look that seemed to say, "See, told you." Alone, Vivian stared at the food. Her hands shook as she picked up the fork. The first bite of eggs was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. The second brought tears. By the third, she was crying openly, great heaving sobs that had nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with the kindness of strangers. She'd knocked on 19 doors. 18 had closed, but the 19th had opened. And for the first time in months, Vivian Brennan dared to hope. 3 days later, 50 miles south, William Brennan rode into the town of Copper Ridge. The journey from Colorado had been long and cold, but Will didn't feel the weather. Anger kept him warm. Anger and the certainty that he was closing in on his prey. Vivian thought she was clever, thought she could disappear into the Montana wilderness like some kind of ghost. But Will knew his wife. Knew she'd run north toward territories where law was thin and questions were few. Knew she'd follow the railroad lines because her delicate sensibilities wouldn't let her venture too far from civilization. Knew she was pregnant and desperate and running out of places to hide. He'd tracked her through 3 territories, following a trail of closed doors and sympathetic fools who'd taken pity on a woman with a sad story. Each town brought him closer. Each rejected plea for help narrowed the search. And now, Copper Ridge. A nothing town in the middle of nowhere, but it had a train station, a general store, places where a desperate woman might seek help. Will tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and stepped inside. A man looked up from behind a desk, middle-aged and tired-looking, with the star of a territorial lawman pinned to his vest. "Help you?" The sheriff's voice was cautious. Strangers asking for help usually meant trouble. "I hope so." Will produced his own badge, the Silver Star from Silver Creek, catching the lamplight. "Sheriff William Brennan. I'm looking for my wife." The transformation was immediate. One lawman to another, the territorial sheriff's posture relaxed. "Wife trouble, hell, join the club." "What did she do?" "Run off with the milk money." Will's smile was practiced. "Charming, believable." "Something like that. She's not well. Her father died recently, and the grief affected her mind. She ran away. I've been following her trail for weeks." He placed a photograph on the desk. "Vivian taken a year ago before the bruises and the fear. Still beautiful, still his." The sheriff studied the picture. "Pretty girl. Haven't seen her myself, but this is a small town. If she came through, someone would have noticed a pregnant woman traveling alone." "She's 8 months along. My child." The lie came easily. The baby was his, technically, but Will had never wanted it. Children were complications. This one would be useful, though. Legal leverage. "I'll ask around. Where are you staying?" "The hotel, I suppose, for however long it takes." Will leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Sheriff, I just want my wife back. Want to make sure she's safe. She's not thinking clearly, and in her condition." "Say no more. We'll find her. This territory takes care of its own, and that includes helping fellow lawmen." Will shook the man's hand, feeling satisfaction curl in his chest. The law was on his side. It always had been. Vivian could run, but she couldn't hide. Not from him. Not ever. The screaming woke the house at dawn. Vivian bolted upright, her heart hammering, until she realized the screams weren't hers. They came from outside, from the ranch yard, masculine and sharp with pain. She threw off the quilts and moved to the window as quickly as her pregnant belly would allow. Below, in the early morning light, chaos unfolded. A man lay in the snow clutching his side. A horse danced nervously nearby, eyes rolling white. And Hank Dalton was already running from the barn, Jo close behind with her skirts hiked up around her knees. Vivian didn't think. She grabbed the robe Jo had left for her and ran. By the time she reached the yard, Hank had the injured man sitting up. It was Sam, the ranch hand she'd glimpsed bringing firewood yesterday. His face was gray with pain, one arm wrapped protectively around his ribs. "Damn horse kicked me," Sam gasped. "Should have seen it coming. Stupid. So stupid." "Let me see." Hank's hands were already moving, gentle but firm, probing Sam's side. The ranch hand hissed in pain. "Don't think anything's broken, but—" "Move aside!" Vivian's voice cut through the morning air with surprising authority. "Let me look." Everyone turned. Hank's eyes widened. "Miss Grace, you shouldn't be out here in your condition." "I've seen broken ribs before, more times than I'd like to count." She knelt in the snow beside Sam, ignoring the cold seeping through her nightgown. "This is going to hurt. I apologize." Her hands moved over Sam's torso, pressing carefully, watching his face for reactions. Years of patching up injuries, of learning which bones broke and which only bruised, guided her fingers. This knowledge hadn't come from books or formal training. It had come from necessity, from hiding Will's violence, from covering bruises and explaining falls that never happened. Dark skills earned in darkness, but useful now. "2 ribs cracked," she announced. "Maybe 3. Not broken through, or you'd be coughing blood. But they need binding, tight. And you need rest." "Ranch don't run on rest," Sam muttered. "Ranch runs fine without you killing yourself," Jo countered. She'd appeared with an armful of bandages, as if she'd known they'd be needed. "Listen to the lady." Vivian worked quickly, wrapping Sam's torso with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Too many times before. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice stayed steady as she explained what he needed to do. Shallow breaths, no heavy lifting sleep, sitting up for a few days. When she finished, Sam looked at her with new respect. "You're good at this." "I've had practice." "Where'd you learn? You a nurse or something?" The question hung in the cold air. Vivian felt Hank's eyes on her, felt the weight of curiosity from everyone gathered. She could lie, should lie, but something about the directness of the question, the genuine interest, made her choose honesty. No, I learned from necessity. When you can't afford a doctor, you learn to tend wounds yourself. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. Hank helped Sam to his feet. "Get him inside, Joe. I'll handle morning chores." As they moved toward the house, Hank's hand touched Vivian's elbow. Gentle, brief. But the contact sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with temperature. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Sam's been with me 10 years. He's more than hired help. He's family." "I understand family." Vivian pulled the robe tighter around herself, suddenly aware she was standing in a nightgown in front of a man she barely knew. "I should go inside, get warm." And Miss Grace, his blue-gray eyes held hers. "Whatever you learned those skills from, I'm grateful you have them. Sam is too, even if he's too proud to say it properly." She nodded and turned back toward the house. Halfway there, she glanced back. Hank stood watching her, an expression on his face she couldn't quite read. Not suspicion, not pity. Something else. Something that looked almost like respect. Christmas Eve arrived with unexpected warmth. Not temperature. The Montana winter remained brutal. But inside Dalton Ranch, something had shifted. The house, which Joe later told her had been silent as a tomb for 2 years now, rang with life. Joe cooked. She cooked with the fervor of a woman who'd been denied an audience for too long. The kitchen filled with smells that made Vivian's pregnancy craving sing roasting meat, baking bread, something sweet and cinnamon that had to be pie. "We always made a fuss at Christmas," Joe explained, her hands deep in pie dough. "Ruth loved it, insisted on a proper celebration even when money was tight. After she passed, Henry wanted to skip it. But I told him grief was no excuse for forgetting joy. So we cook, we eat, we remember." Vivian sat at the kitchen table, supposedly peeling potatoes, but mostly watching Joe work. The housekeeper moved with the confidence of someone who'd been running this kitchen for decades. "How long have you been here?" Vivian asked. 20 years. Came when Henry's parents were still alive. Stayed after they passed. Stayed after Ruth." She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. "This house is my home. These people are my family, even when they're being stubborn fools about their feelings." "Hank seems like a good man." "He is. Was always kind even as a boy, but grief hollowed him out. Watching him these past 2 years has been like watching a ghost haunt his own life." Joe paused in her, kneading, her eyes sharp. "Until you arrived. I'm just—" "Don't." Joe's voice was firm but not unkind. "Don't diminish what you've done. You've given this house something it's been missing. Purpose. Someone to care for beyond cattle and fences. Henry's been moving through days like they don't matter. Now he asks about you, worries about you. That's the first sign of life I've seen from him since we buried Ruth." The words settled over Vivian like a weight. She hadn't meant to matter, hadn't planned to be anything more than a temporary burden. But somehow in 3 days, she'd become woven into the fabric of this house. The back door opened. Sam entered, moving carefully, one hand pressed to his bound ribs. Behind him came Hank, his arms, full of firewood snow, dusting his shoulders. "Smells like heaven in here," Sam announced. "Joe, you trying to fatten us up for slaughter? Just feeding men too stupid to take care of themselves?" But Joe's smile was warm. "Set the table, all of you. We're eating together." "Joe, I can eat in my room," Vivian started. "You can eat at this table like family, because that's what you are while you're under this roof. Now move. These pies won't serve themselves." Dinner was chaos. The good kind. Sam told stories about ranch disasters that had Joe scolding and Hank laughing. Real laughter, the kind that transformed his serious face into something younger, lighter. Vivian found herself smiling, then laughing, then for a few blessed hours forgetting that she was a fugitive eating Christmas dinner with strangers. After the meal, Sam produced a guitar from somewhere. He played badly, beautifully badly. Songs that were more enthusiasm than skill, but the joy in them was infectious. "Christmas carols," he announced. "Everybody sings." "I don't sing," Hank said. "You will tonight." Sam strummed an opening chord. "Or I'll play this thing until your ears bleed." They sang. Horribly. Vivian couldn't carry a tune Joe sang off-key with tremendous confidence, and Hank's baritone was rusty from disuse. But they sang. And somewhere in the middle of the third carol, Vivian realized she was crying. Not from sadness, from something else. Something that felt dangerously close to happiness. Hank noticed. He always seemed to notice. Across the table his eyes met hers, a question in them. She smiled through tears and mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded understanding without words. Later, much later, when Sam had been sent to bed and Joe had retired, Vivian stood at the parlor window watching snow fall. The house was quiet again, but it was a different quiet now, peaceful rather than empty. "Can't sleep." Hank's voice came from the doorway. He'd changed from his dinner clothes into work gear, preparing for night chores. "Too much to think about." He joined her at the window, keeping a respectful distance. They stood in silence, watching the world turn white. "This was nice," Vivian said finally. "Today. Thank you for including me. You're part of the household now. That means you're included in everything, good and bad. Even though I'm a stranger, even though you don't know anything about me, I know you're kind. I know you helped Sam without being asked. I know you're running from something, but won't let fear make you weak." He paused. "That's enough to know. Is it? What if I'm lying about everything? Are you?" Vivian thought about Will, about the wanted posters she didn't know existed, about the inheritance that had started everything, the death of David Morrison that haunted her dreams, the violence that had finally driven her into the snow. "Not about everything," she said quietly, "but not the whole truth either. When you're ready to tell me the whole truth, I'll listen. Until then, you're safe here. That's all that matters." The words were simple. The promise behind them was not. "Why are you doing this?" Vivian turned to face him fully. "Really doing this? It can't just be about your wife." Hank was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was raw. "After Ruth died, I wanted to die too. For months, I'd wake up and wonder why I was still breathing. The ranch kept going because Sam and Joe wouldn't let it fall apart. But I was gone, just a body going through motions." He looked at her, really looked, and Vivian saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Then you showed up. And suddenly, I had a reason to get up in the morning, someone who needed help, someone I could actually save. It sounds selfish when I say it like that. It doesn't sound selfish, it sounds human. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just a broken man looking for redemption in a stranger's suffering. Maybe we're both broken, and maybe that's okay." The moment stretched between them fragile and important. Then Hank smiled small and sad and genuine. "Merry Christmas, Vivian Grace. Merry Christmas, Henry Dalton." He left for night chores. Vivian stayed at the window watching his figure disappear into the barn. The snow fell heavier now, covering tracks burying the past. For tonight at least she could pretend Will Brennan didn't exist. Could pretend she wasn't a fugitive with a price on her head. Could pretend this warmth, this belonging was something that might last. Tomorrow would bring reality back. But tonight was Christmas, and tonight she was home. New Year's Eve found Vivian in the study surrounded by ledgers. She'd offered to help with bookkeeping 3 days ago. Hank had been skeptical. Most women of her class weren't educated in mathematics. Most men assumed female brains weren't built for numbers. Vivian had proved them wrong in under an hour. Now she sat at Hank's desk, her pregnant belly pressed against the wood, a pencil in her hand, and a frown on her face. "Your feed supplier is robbing you blind," she announced when Hank entered with coffee. He set the cup beside her, peering over her shoulder at the columns of numbers. "Jim Hendricks has been supplying this ranch for 15 years. Then he's been overcharging you for at least that long. Look," she pointed to the ledger, "you're paying $2 more per bushel than market rate. Over a year, that's..." She did quick math in her head. $240. Gone. Stolen through inflated prices. Hank leaned closer, his presence warm at her back. She could smell snow and leather and something woodsy that was just him. It was distracting in ways she didn't want to examine. How do you know market rates? My father was a clerk before he... She stopped. The lie was getting complicated. Before he died, he taught me to read ledgers, to spot discrepancies, said a woman should understand money or men would cheat her. It was partially true. Her father had taught her bookkeeping. What she didn't mention was that she'd used those skills to hide money from Will, to create a secret fund that had eventually financed her escape, to become very, very good at seeing where numbers didn't add up. Hank studied the ledger, then her, then the ledger again. You're right. Damn, I should have caught this. You're a rancher, not an accountant. You trusted your supplier. He took advantage. She flipped to another page. It's not just feed. Your equipment costs are inflated too. And these freight charges, she tapped the page, these make no sense, unless someone's padding the bills and pocketing the difference. Son of a... Hank trailed off, clearly torn between anger and admiration. You found all this in 3 days. I had time and motivation. I told you I'd earn my keep. Miss Grace, you've just saved this ranch $200 a year. I'd say you've more than earned it. The praise made her flush. Will had never praised her, had mocked her intelligence. Her education told her women who thought too much were unnatural. Hearing Hank acknowledge her skills with genuine respect was intoxicating. It's just numbers, she said, trying to sound dismissive. It's my livelihood. And you just protected it. He straightened but didn't move away. Where did you really learn this, Vivian? The use of her first name. The gentle question almost broke her. She wanted to tell him, wanted to explain about Will's gambling debts, about hiding money in false ledgers, about David Morrison, who'd been Will's business partner until he'd tried to help her escape. But telling meant revealing everything, and she wasn't ready, might never be ready. Does it matter? She asked instead. I suppose not. Results matter more than methods. But his eyes said he knew she was hiding something, said he'd wait until she was ready to share. The moment was broken by Joe's voice from the hallway. Henry? You need to come and see this. They found her in Ruth's room. Vivian hadn't been in there since the first night when she'd accidentally wandered in and seen the preserved nursery. But now the door stood open, and Joe stood in the center, her face pale. What's wrong? Hank's voice was sharp with worry. Nothing's wrong, it's just... Joe gestured around the room. It's New Year's Eve, 2 years since Ruth passed. I thought maybe it was time. The room was exactly as Vivian remembered. Frozen in time, waiting for a family that would never come home. Hank's face went carefully blank. Time for what? To pack it up, to let go. Joe's voice was gentle but firm. You can't keep living in a mausoleum, Henry. Ruth wouldn't want this. You know she wouldn't. You want me to forget her. I want you to remember her without this. Joe waved at the dusty nursery, the unused cradle, the clothes that would never be worn. This isn't memory. This is punishment. Hank stood frozen, his jaw working. Vivian could see the war in him, grief versus guilt, holding on versus letting go. I'll help, Vivian heard herself say. If you want. Pack things away properly, with respect. Both of them turned to look at her. Joe's expression was grateful. Hank's was unreadable. Why would you do that? He asked. Because I know what it's like to be stuck in the past, to let old pain keep you from moving forward. She thought of David's death, of the guilt that still woke her at night. Sometimes we need help letting go, even when we're not ready. Silence stretched. Then so quietly she almost missed it, Hank spoke. All right. They worked through the afternoon. Joe packed baby clothes with gentle hands, folding each piece with care before placing it in trunks. Vivian sorted through linens, through the tiny shoes Ruth had made, through all the hopes that had died with her. Hank stood at the window watching, but not touching. Not yet. This was still too raw for him. Tell me about her, Vivian said softly. About Ruth. Joe smiled, sad but genuine. She was sunshine. That's the best way to describe her. Laughed at everything. Saw joy in the smallest things. A good morning, a pretty bird, fresh bread. She made this house feel alive. How did they meet? Church social. Ruth was visiting from Wyoming. Henry saw her across the room, and that was it. Struck dumb as a post. Joe's laugh was warm with memory. Took him 3 months to work up the courage to court her properly. But once he did, they were inseparable. She sounds wonderful. She was, and she'd like you, I think. Would appreciate how you speak your mind. How you don't let fear make you small. From the window, Hank's voice joined the conversation. Ruth would have brought you in from that storm herself. Would have fussed over you, made you eat, probably tried to teach you to knit, even though she was terrible at it. It was the first time he'd spoken of Ruth in present terms as a person rather than a ghost. Progress, Vivian thought. Small, but real. As sunset painted the room gold, they finished. The nursery was packed away. The room stood empty, ready to be something else, something new. Thank you, Hank said to both of them. I know this couldn't have been easy. Nothing worth doing is easy, Joe replied. She dusted off her hands. Now it's New Year's Eve. We should mark it properly. I'll make something special for supper. She left her footsteps echoing down the hall. Vivian made to follow, but Hank's voice stopped her. Wait. She turned. He stood in the empty nursery, surrounded by rectangles of dust where furniture had been. In the golden light he looked younger, less burdened. I need to tell you something, he said. About that night, the night Ruth died. Vivian's heart clenched. She didn't want to hear this, didn't want to carry his pain along with her own. But something in his face said he needed to speak, and she found herself nodding. I was in town, supply run. Should have been back by noon, but I ran into a friend. We had drinks, talked. I stayed later than I should have. His voice was flat, reciting facts. When I got home, it was dark. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I found her in bed. The midwife was there, but it was already over. Ruth had gone into labor alone. The baby was breech. She'd bled out. He stopped, his jaw clenching against emotion. The baby? Vivian asked gently. A boy. He didn't survive either. They're buried together, out past the north pasture under the oak tree. I'm so sorry. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't change anything. He looked at her, finally, his eyes red but dry. For 2 years I've been trying to figure out what I could have done differently. If I'd come home on time, if I'd hired a doctor to stay during her pregnancy, if I'd been more careful, more attentive, more something. It's not your fault. Isn't it? I was drinking with a friend while my wife died alone. You couldn't have known. Life doesn't send warnings before it takes people. It just takes them. Vivian moved closer, close enough to touch, but not touching. You didn't fail her, Hank. Tragedy isn't failure. It's just tragedy. You sound like you know something about it. I do. The words came before she could stop them. I watched someone die because of me, because I made a choice that got him killed. So, yes, I know about guilt, about wishing you could go back and change everything, about hating yourself for surviving when someone else didn't. She'd said too much, revealed too much. But Hank didn't press for details. He just nodded, understanding, passing between them without words. Does it get better? He asked. The guilt, I don't know yet, but I think maybe we can't make it better alone. Maybe we need other people to remind us we're human, that humans make mistakes, that surviving those mistakes doesn't make us monsters. Hank's laugh was bitter. Is that what we are? Two broken people pretending we're whole? Maybe. Or maybe we're two broken people helping each other heal. The distance between them felt charged. Important. Vivian became acutely aware that they were alone in a bedroom at sunset, that Hank was looking at her with something beyond gratitude, something that made her pulse quicken despite every reason it shouldn't. I should go, she said, stepping back. Help Joe with dinner. Vivian, her name on his lips, stopped her. Thank you for this, for being here, for... He trailed off, searching for words, for making this house feel less like a tomb. She nodded. not trusting her voice, and fled. In the hallway she pressed a hand to her racing heart. This was dangerous. These feelings, this connection, this growing attachment to a man and a place that could never be hers. Will was out there, hunting her, getting closer every day. When he found her, and he would find her, all of this would end. Hank would discover she'd lied. Joe would realize she'd harbored a fugitive. Sam would know his trust had been misplaced. She couldn't let herself care, couldn't let this temporary shelter become something more. But in the empty hallway, listening to Hank's footsteps in Ruth's room, Vivian admitted the truth to herself. It was already too late. Midnight came with snow. They gathered on the porch to watch the new year arrive. Sam had insisted despite his ribs. Joe had brought blankets and hot cider. Hank stood at the railing, his face tilted toward the sky. 1 minute, Sam announced, checking his pocket watch. 59, 58. Vivian held her cider with both hands, feeling the baby shift inside her. This time next year, she'd have a child, would be someone's mother. The thought was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. 30 seconds. Would she be here, or would Will have found her by then, dragged her back to Colorado, taken her child the moment it was born? 10, 9, 8. She looked at Hank, found him already looking at her. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. Cheers. Laughter. Joe hugging Sam carefully around his injuries, and Hank crossing the porch toward Vivian with something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Happy New Year, Vivian. Happy New Year. They stood closer than necessary, the snow falling around them like a blessing. For one perfect moment, the world was just this warmth and safety and possibility. Then, from the darkness beyond the porch light, a horse whinnied. Everyone froze. Visitors at midnight on New Year's Eve were unheard of. Hank's hand went instinctively to the rifle by the door. Sam, get the women inside. Wait! Vivian grabbed his arm. What if it's... She didn't finish. Didn't need to. They all knew what she feared. The rider emerged from shadow into light. Not Will. A stranger. Dusty from travel, his face weathered and tired. Sorry to intrude, the man called. I'm looking for Copper Ridge. Got turned around in the dark. Relief made Vivian's knees weak. Just a lost traveler. Hank relaxed, giving directions. The man thanked him and rode on. But the moment was broken. The fear was back. Inside, Joe said firmly. All of us. It's too cold for standing around worrying about shadows. They filed in. But at the door, Vivian looked back at the darkness. Somewhere out there in that vast Montana night, William Brennan was hunting her. She'd had 2 weeks of peace, 2 weeks of warmth and kindness and hope. How many more did she have before her husband found her? As if in answer, the wind picked up, carrying voices from the distant town. Copper Ridge, 30 miles away. Where, unknown to anyone at Dalton Ranch, William Brennan had just checked into the hotel. Where Sheriff Marcus Wade had just promised to help find the missing wife. Where wanted posters with Vivian's face were being posted in every public building. The storm was coming, and this time it wouldn't be made of snow. The town of Copper Ridge woke to news on January 7th. Word traveled fast in small communities, especially when it involved one of their own. By mid-morning, every household knew that Henry Dalton's mysterious house guest was being sought by a sheriff from Colorado, a husband looking for his runaway wife. The story, as Will Brennan told it, was heartbreaking. His pregnant wife, mad with grief over her father's death, had fled into the wilderness. He'd been searching for weeks, desperate to bring her home safely before the baby came. What loving husband wouldn't do the same? Some believed him immediately. Sheriff Marcus Wade, for one, saw a fellow lawman in distress and offered full cooperation. The hotel owner gave Will his best room at half price. The church ladies organized a prayer circle for the poor deranged woman wandering the frozen territories. Others were less convinced. Agnes Hartford, who'd been reading people for 65 years and had rarely been wrong, took one look at William Brennan's charming smile and saw a snake in gentleman's clothing. She rode out to Dalton Ranch that morning, with purpose. Vivian was in the study when Joe announced Agnes's arrival. The older woman swept in like a winter gale, her tiny frame vibrating with urgency. "There's a man in town," Agnes announced without preamble, "asking about you. Says he's your husband." The ledger Vivian had been reviewing slipped from her fingers. The sound of it hitting the floor seemed impossibly loud. What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I don't gossip with snakes." Agnes settled into a chair, her sharp eyes assessing Vivian's pale face. "But others aren't so discerning. Half the town thinks you're a poor mad thing who needs saving. The other half hasn't made up their minds yet." "He's here." The words came out as a whisper. "In Copper Ridge. 30 miles away. Close enough." Agnes leaned forward. "Now I don't know your story, girl, and I won't pry. But I know evil when I see it, and that man walking around playing the concerned husband is evil wrapped in Sunday clothes. So I'm asking you straight. Are you running from him for good reason?" Vivian looked at this stranger who'd shown her nothing but kindness, saw genuine concern in those aged eyes, and made a choice. "Yes." "Did he hurt you?" "Yes." "Will he hurt you again if he finds you?" "Yes, and he'll take my baby, raise it to be just like him, or worse." Agnes nodded as if this confirmed everything she'd suspected. "Then we'd better make sure he doesn't find you. Where's Henry?" "In the barn with Sam." "Why?" "Because that boy needs to stop wallowing and start protecting what's his." Agnes stood her small frame somehow commanding. "You stay here. I'll fetch him." "Mrs. Hartford, I can't ask Hank to—" "You're not asking. I am. And Henry Dalton might be stubborn as a mule, but he's his father's son. When push comes to shove, he'll do the right thing." She swept out, leaving Vivian alone with her racing thoughts. Will was 30 miles away. Close enough to ride to Dalton Ranch in a few hours. Close enough that any trip to town might end in confrontation. Close enough that the safety she'd felt for 2 weeks was revealed as the illusion it had always been. Vivian's hand moved to her belly, feeling the baby shift. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought we'd have more time." Hank was examining Juniper's left foreleg when Agnes found him. The mare had been favoring it slightly, and he wanted to check for stones or swelling before it became serious. "Henry Dalton, we need to talk." He looked up to find Agnes Hartford standing in the barn doorway, backlit by winter sun, looking like an avenging angel despite her 5-foot frame. "Agnes, what brings you all the way out here? Trouble. The kind you can't ignore." She approached her boots crunching on hay. "There's a man in Copper Ridge, sheriff from Colorado. Says he's looking for his wife. Pregnant. Dark hair. Sound familiar?" Hank's hands stilled on Juniper's leg. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing useful. But Wade's helping him search. And you know how small communities are. Someone will remember seeing a pregnant woman at the general store. Someone will mention Dalton Ranch. It's only a matter of time." Hank straightened slowly, his mind racing. He'd known this moment would come, had known from the moment he'd burned that wanted poster that he was choosing sides in a conflict he didn't fully understand. But knowing and facing were different things. Is she really running from him? Or is he telling the truth about grief and madness? Agnes's laugh was sharp. "I've been alive 65 years, boy. I know the difference between a concerned husband and a predator. That man is hunting her, and when he finds her, he won't be gentle. How do you know? Because I've seen that look before. On my own husband's face, God rest his miserable soul. Some men think women are property, think marriage gives them ownership. This William Brennan is one of those men." Hank thought about Vivian's flinch when he'd moved too quickly. The way she watched doors as if expecting them to burst open, the bruises Joe had found under her clothes, the terror in her delirious voice that first night. "What do you think I should do?" "Marry her." The words landed like a thunderclap. "What? You heard me. Marry her. If she's your wife, he has no legal claim. Can't drag her back to Colorado. Can't take the baby. Marriage trumps marriage, legally speaking." Agnes, that's insane. Is it, or is it the only way to protect a woman in desperate need?" The old woman's eyes were fierce. "I know you loved Ruth. I know her death nearly broke you, but she's gone, Henry. And there's a living woman in your house who needs help you can give. By marrying a stranger, by doing what's right. That baby's due in a month. You want Vivian dragged back to Colorado just in time to give birth. You want her raising a child with a man who beat her." The thought made Hank's stomach turn. He'd seen Vivian with Sam gentle and competent, seen her laugh at Joe's stories, work quietly in his study, touch her belly with unconscious tenderness. The idea of someone hurting her, controlling her, taking her child. He's a sheriff. He'll have law on his side. Then we'll make our own law. Reverend Gray can marry you today, right now, before Brennan gets word that she's here. And if she doesn't want to marry me, then ask her and find out. But Henry, Agnes's voice softened, that girl is running out of places to hide. You might be her last door. Don't close it in her face. Hank found Vivian in the parlor, standing at the window watching nothing. She turned when he entered. The fear in her eyes made his decision easier. "Agnes told me," he said without preamble, "about the sheriff in town. I should leave, before he finds out I'm here, before I bring trouble to your door." "Where would you go?" "I don't know. Somewhere. Anywhere that's not here." "Vivian, you're 8 months pregnant. It's the middle of winter. You barely survived getting here. Where exactly do you think you'll run to?" She had no answer. They both knew it. Hank crossed the room, stopping a respectful distance away, close enough to talk quietly, far enough that she wouldn't feel trapped. "I have a proposal, and I need you to hear me out before you answer." She waited, her hand pressed protectively against her belly. "Marry me." Whatever she'd expected, it wasn't that. Her eyes widened. "What? Not a real marriage. Not in the way marriages usually are, but legal, binding. If you're my wife, Will Brennan has no claim on you, can't force you back to Colorado, can't take your baby. Hank, that's insane. Is it, or is it practical?" He kept his voice level, treating this like a business proposition, because if he acknowledged the other feelings starting to grow, this conversation would become impossible. "You need protection. I can provide it. You need a home for yourself and your child. I have one. You need a name that isn't attached to a wanted poster. I'm offering mine." "Why would you do this? You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're kind. I know you're running from someone who hurt you. I know you're carrying a child who deserves better than being raised by a man who drove his pregnant wife into a blizzard." He paused. "And I know that if I let Will Brennan take you, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Vivian's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "What about Ruth? What about your real marriage? Ruth is gone. This doesn't diminish what we had. This is something different, something necessary." He took a careful step closer. "I'm not asking you to love me, Vivian. I'm asking you to let me protect you. There's a difference." "Is there?" The question hung between them, complicated and important. For now, yes. What it becomes later, we'll figure that out when later comes. She turned back to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. When she spoke, her voice was small. "I lied to you. About almost everything. My name isn't Grace, it's Brennan. Vivian Brennan. Will is my husband. We're still legally married. If you marry me, you'd be committing bigamy." The words hung in the air between them. Hank's expression didn't change, but Vivian saw something shift in his eyes. Not judgment, understanding. "There's more," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "You deserve to know all of it, not just the parts that make me sympathetic." She moved to the window, unable to face him while speaking. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, each flake catching lamplight before disappearing into darkness. "Will had a business partner when we lived in Silver Creek, David Morrison. He was younger than Will Kinder, the kind of man who actually listened when women spoke." A sad smile touched her lips. "David saw what I was, what Will had turned me into, a shadow, a ghost in my own home. He tried to help you," Hank said quietly. "More than try. He gave me everything, money he'd saved for years, documents for travel, the address of a women's shelter in Denver. He had it all planned out. I was supposed to leave while Will was at a lawman's conference in Cheyenne. David would tell people I'd gone to visit family back east. By the time Will discovered the truth, I'd be somewhere he'd never find me. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. But Will came home early from the conference, found David in his office packing the last of the money. They fought. David tried to explain to reason with him. Will didn't want reason. He wanted blood. The next words came slowly, painfully. Will pushed him down the main stairs of the office building, 15 steps. David's neck broke on the 7th. He was dead before he reached the bottom. Behind her, Hank made a sound of horror. Will called the sheriff, his friend naturally, told them David had been drinking, lost his balance, fell. The money David had saved Will claimed it was embezzled from their partnership, made David look like a thief and a drunk. No one questioned it. Why would they? Will was a sheriff, an upstanding citizen, a grieving partner who'd lost his best friend to tragedy. And you, Hank's voice was rough with anger he wasn't trying to hide. Will came home that night covered in David's blood, told me exactly what happened, told me that if I ever breathed a word of truth he'd say, I seduced David, that we were lovers planning to steal from him and run away together, that I'd pushed David in a jealous rage when he tried to back out. He had witnesses who'd swear to seeing us together, people who owed him favors. He'd built the perfect trap. Vivian turned, finally meeting Hank's eyes. So I kept silent, went to David's funeral and pretended to grieve a business associate, watched them bury a good man who died trying to save me. And then when I discovered I was pregnant, I realized I couldn't raise a child in that house, couldn't let my son or daughter grow up watching their mother disappear piece by piece. That's when you ran. I waited until Will left for another conference, took the money David had died trying to give me. It was hidden in our bedroom in a place Will thought I'd never look. His arrogance was my salvation. I walked out of that house with nothing but the clothes I wore and blood money in my pocket. David's blood, bought with his life. Tears streamed down her face, now hot and cleansing. That's why I can never be free of guilt. David Morrison died because I was too weak to save myself, because I stayed with a monster and let a good man think I was worth dying for. Hank crossed the room in 3 strides. His hands cupped her face, gentle and firm, forcing her to meet his gaze. Listen to me, Vivian Brennan. David's death wasn't your fault. Will Brennan murdered him, not you, not your weakness, not your fear. Will's violence killed David just like it tried to kill you. The only difference is David didn't survive and you did. I should have left sooner, should have been braver, should have had a husband who didn't beat you, should have had law enforcement that protected women instead of protecting abusers, should have lived in a world where running didn't mean dying in a blizzard. His voice was fierce. You survived, Vivian, against odds that would have broken most people. David's gift to you was the chance at life. Don't dishonor his memory by wasting it on guilt. The words broke something inside her. Vivian collapsed against Hank's chest, sobbing in a way she hadn't allowed herself since David's funeral. Great heaving cries that came from a place deeper than grief, a place where anger and sorrow and relief mixed into something too complex for words. Hank held her through it all, didn't try to quiet her, didn't offer false comfort, just stood solid and present while she finally mourned the man who died, giving her freedom. When the storm passed, Vivian pulled back, wiping her face with shaking hands. Now you know everything, the worst of it. I'm not just running from an abusive husband. I'm running from a murder I witnessed, from a sheriff who killed his business partner and got away with it, from a past that Will can weaponize whenever he wants. Then we'll make sure he can't, Hank said. We'll tell Reverend Gray everything. He'll know how to handle it, how to build a case that protects you and honors David's memory. What if it's not enough? What if Will's connections run too deep? Then we'll fight anyway, because you didn't survive this much just to surrender now. He took her hand, his grip warm and certain. And, Vivian, thank you for telling me, for trusting me with the whole truth. But even the ugly parts, especially those, the ugly parts are what make the survival matter. It was more honest than he'd intended, more revealing. But Vivian's small smile said she understood. If I say yes to this marriage, it has to be an arrangement, not a real marriage. I'm not ready for... I understand. Protection and security. Nothing more. Not unless you want it. And if I never want it, then we're two people sharing a house and a name. That's enough. She studied his face, searching for deception, finding none. All right, she said finally. I'll marry you. The town of Copper Ridge discovered Vivian Brennan 3 hours later. Joe had gone for supplies, careful and cautious. But small towns had eyes everywhere. Someone saw her buying extra flour and eggs. Someone else noticed baby fabric in her basket. Word spread. By noon it reached the hotel where Will was staying. He listened to the gossip with perfect calm, his handsome face arranged in concerned husband mode. But inside rage burned cold and bright. She was at Dalton Ranch, living in comfort while he'd been searching through 3 territories, protected by some cowboy who thought himself a hero. Will thanked his informant, a chatty shopkeeper eager to help, and walked to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Marcus Wade looked up from his desk when Will entered. "Brennan, any news?" "I believe I've found her. She's staying at a ranch outside town. Dalton property." Wade's expression shifted uncomfortable. "Henry Dalton's place. You know him. Everyone knows Henry. Good man. Lost his wife a couple years back. If he's sheltering someone, he has good reason. He's sheltering my wife, without my knowledge or consent. That's not charity, Sheriff. That's theft. Now hold on. We don't know the full situation." Will produced his marriage certificate with practiced timing. "Here's the situation. Vivian Brennan is my legal wife. If this Henry Dalton has married her, or plans to, that's bigamy, a crime in this territory last I checked." Wade took the document, examining it carefully. The marriage was legitimate, dated 3 years prior, properly witnessed and filed. Even if Dalton marries her, we'd need to investigate the first marriage, see if there are grounds for annulment. There aren't. We were married in good standing. She left because she's unwell. Grief over her father's death affected her mind. Will's voice was perfectly pitched, concerned, patient, reasonable. "I just want my wife and child back, Sheriff." "Surely the law protects a man's right to his own family." "It does. But it also protects women from..." Wade paused, choosing words carefully. "From situations that might warrant leaving." "Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm saying I need to hear both sides before taking action." Will's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. "Then let's go ask her. Together. Right now. I'm sure Vivian will explain everything." It was a chess move, and Wade knew it. Refusing would look like favoritism. Agreeing meant bringing Will to Vivian's door. The sheriff made his choice. "All right, we'll ride out, but Brennan, you'll let me do the talking. This is my jurisdiction." "Of course, Sheriff. I'm just a concerned husband." They rode out within the hour. Will on his rented horse, Wade on his steady mare, both heading toward Dalton Ranch with very different intentions. Behind them, Agnes Hartford watched from her window. The moment they left town, she climbed into her buggy and took the back roads, racing to reach the ranch first. She had to warn them. Reverend Tobias Gray arrived at Dalton Ranch to find the household in controlled chaos. Agnes had beaten the sheriff by 20 minutes, bursting in with news that sent everyone into action. Joe pulled out her best tablecloth. Sam cleaned up despite his injured ribs. Hank changed into Sunday clothes. And Vivian stood in the guest room staring at herself in the mirror, trying to comprehend that in the next hour she would be married. Again. Joe had lent her a dress, simple blue cotton let out to accommodate her pregnancy, nothing like the elaborate gown she'd worn when marrying Will. That wedding had been a performance for society. This one would be survival. "Are you sure about this?" Joe asked, pinning Vivian's hair up in a simple style. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." That's as honest an answer as any bride's given. Joe's hands were gentle, maternal. "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Henry's a good man. He'll keep you safe. What if Will challenges the marriage? What if he has us both arrested for bigamy? Then Reverend Gray will find a legal solution. That man's forgotten more law than most judges know." Joe stepped back, assessing her work. "There, you look lovely." Vivian studied her reflection. pale, frightened, but determined. "Let's do this before I lose my nerve." They descended to the parlor where everyone waited. Hank stood by the fireplace, his dark suit making him look formal and unfamiliar. Sam hovered near the door, keeping watch. Agnes sat in the best chair, her face grim but approving, and Reverend Gray stood in the center, his prayer book open, his expression grave. "Are we ready?" he asked. "We are," Hank said. The Reverend looked at Vivian. "And you, Miss Brennan, you enter this marriage of your own free will." "I do. Understanding that while unusual, this union is legally binding, I understand." "Then let us begin. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses." The words washed over Vivian like a dream. She'd heard them before 3 years ago, standing beside Will in a church full of people who'd thought them a perfect match. Young love, bright future, how wrong they'd all been. "Do you, Henry Dalton, take this woman?" Hank's responses were steady. "Sure," no hesitation. "Do you, Vivian Brennan, take this man?" Her voice shook, but she got the words out. "I do." "The rings." There was an awkward pause. They'd planned this so quickly no one had thought of rings. Then Hank reached into his pocket and produced a simple gold band. "It was my grandmother's, if you'll accept it." Vivian's throat tightened. This was real. This was happening. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "By the power vested in me by Montana Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Gray paused, glancing at Hank. "You may kiss." "That won't be necessary," Hank said quickly. The Reverend nodded understanding. "Then I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Henry Dalton. May God bless this union and grant you both peace." It was done. Vivian was married. Again. To a man she'd known for 3 weeks. A marriage of protection, not love. A shield against the storm coming. Agnes started to applaud, but Joe hushed her sharply. "Listen." They all heard it. Horses, multiple riders, coming fast. Sam moved to the window. Sheriff Wade and another man. "Will—" Vivian breathed, her face going white. Hank was already moving, positioning himself between Vivian and the door. "Stay behind me, all of you." The knock came loud and official. Hank opened it to find Sheriff Wade on his porch. William Brennan standing just behind him. Vivian's husband was everything she'd described and more. Handsome, well-dressed, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Dalton," Wade said formally, "I need to speak with Vivian Brennan. I understand she's staying here." "She's not available," Hank replied. "I'm her husband." Will interjected, his voice smooth. "I have a legal right to see her." "You were her husband, past tense." Hank stepped aside just enough to reveal Reverend Gray. "Vivian Grace Dalton was married to me 30 minutes ago. The ceremony was legal and witnessed. If you have complaints about her previous marriage, you can take them up with territorial courts." The transformation on Will's face was subtle, but terrifying. The charm slipped, revealing something cold and cruel underneath. "You married my wife. I married my wife. Your relationship with her ended the moment you drove her into a blizzard." "Sheriff," Will's voice went hard, "this man has committed bigamy. I want him arrested." Wade looked uncomfortable, caught between law and instinct. "Mr. Dalton, is this true? You married a woman who was already married." "I married a woman who'd fled abuse. Any previous marriage contract was voided the moment her husband raised a hand to her." "That's a lie." Will's control was slipping. "She's disturbed, mad with grief. She doesn't know what she's saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Vivian stepped out from behind Hank, her chin raised despite her shaking hands. "I left you, Will, because you beat me, because you threatened to kill me and our child, because living with you was worse than dying in the snow." "Darling, you're confused." "Don't call me that." Her voice was ice. "Don't ever call me that again." Will's mask dropped completely. He lunged forward, but Hank blocked him, solid and immovable. "You think you can steal my wife?" Will snarled. "My child. I think I can protect them from you, and I will." "Sheriff," Will spun toward Wade, "are you going to let this stand? He's committed a crime. Wade looked between all of them, his lawman's instincts warring with his conscience. Finally he spoke. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to need to see proof that your marriage is still valid, given the allegations of abuse." "Allegations. She has no proof." "I have medical records," Reverend Gray interrupted quietly, "documenting 6 separate injuries over 2 years, all consistent with assault. I took the liberty of requesting them from the doctor in Silver Creek." Will's face went purple. "You had no right." "I had every right. I won't perform marriages that bind women to abusers." Gray's voice was calm but firm. "Under Colorado territorial law, a marriage can be dissolved if the husband is convicted of felony assault. These records provide grounds." This is... Will was losing coherence, rage overtaking calculation. "I think we should all take a step back." Wade said, his hand moving toward his gun, not threatening but cautious. "Mr. Brennan, until we can sort out the legal situation, I'm going to have to ask you to keep your distance from Mrs. Dalton. Either Mrs. Dalton. She's my wife. Was your wife, maybe. That's for courts to decide." Wade's tone brooked no argument. "For now, she stays here. You stay in town. If you approach this property again, I'll arrest you for trespassing. You can't." "I can, and I will." Wade's expression was steel. "I don't know the full truth yet, but I know when a woman's scared, and that woman is terrified of you. So until we sort this out legally, you keep your distance. Understand?" Will's hands clenched into fists. For a moment Vivian thought he would attack Hank right there. The violence in his eyes was familiar, terrifying. Then he smiled, cold, calculated, frightening in its control. "Of course, Sheriff, I'll wait for the law to settle this." He looked past Hank to Vivian. "I'll be seeing you soon, darling. Count on it." The threat was clear. Wade escorted Will off the property. They watched until both riders disappeared into the distance. Only when they were gone did Vivian's legs give out. Hank caught her, his arms strong and steady. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe." But they both knew it was a lie. Will wouldn't stop. He'd use the law or he'd break it, but he'd come back. The storm had arrived, and it was just beginning. That evening, as darkness fell over Dalton Ranch, Vivian stood at her bedroom window watching snow begin to fall again. She was married. To a good man who'd pledged to protect her, who'd faced down Will without flinching, who'd offered her safety when she had nowhere else to turn. But she'd seen Will's eyes, seen the promise there. This wasn't over. The baby kicked hard as if sensing her distress. Vivian placed both hands on her belly, whispering promises she didn't know if she could keep. "I won't let him have you. I won't let him hurt you, whatever it takes." A soft knock at the door. "Vivian, it's Hank." She opened it to find him holding a tray with tea and bread. Simple, thoughtful. "Thought you might not want to come down for dinner after everything." "Thank you." She took the tray but didn't close the door. "Hank, what you did today, I did what needed doing. You made an enemy. Will doesn't forgive, doesn't forget. He'll come after you now too." "Let him try." Hank's jaw was set, determined. "I've buried one wife. I'll be damned if I lose another to violence." The word "another" settled over them. Wife. That's what she was now. Not in the ways that mattered, not in intimacy or love, but legally, officially. "This isn't a real marriage," she said quietly. "You don't have to. It's real enough. And real enough means I protect you. That's the bargain." What if it's not enough? What if Will finds a way? Hank was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Tomorrow we'll start building a case. Gray will file for annulment of your first marriage. We'll document everything. Build legal walls Will can't break through. And if he doesn't work through legal channels..." The question hung heavy. "Then I'll handle it another way." The implication was clear, and terrifying, and somehow comforting. Vivian looked at this man who'd promised to protect her, who'd married her despite the danger, who stood between her and the monster she'd fled. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." He nodded and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we fight back. But tonight you're safe. I promise." After he left, Vivian sat with her tea looking at the gold band on her finger. Her second wedding ring, her second chance. Outside, the snow fell harder, burying tracks covering the world in white. 30 miles away, in a hotel room in Copper Ridge, William Brennan sat at a desk writing. Letters to judges he knew, lawmen who owed him favors. Friends in high places who could make life difficult for a Montana rancher protecting a fugitive wife. He'd tried charm, tried law, tried public confrontation. Now he'd try something else. Will smiled as he sealed the letters. Vengeance could wait, but not for long. Soon Vivian would learn that you couldn't run from William Brennan. You could only delay the inevitable, and that delay was about to end. The labor pains started at dawn on January 15th. Vivian woke to a sensation she'd never felt before. Not quite pain, more like a tightening, a warning, her body preparing for what was coming. She lay still in the pre-dawn darkness, one hand on her belly counting the seconds between contractions. 10 minutes apart, then 9, then 8. This was happening. Today. Now. She should call for Joe, should wake Hank, should do something other than lie here watching the ceiling lighten with approaching sunrise. But fear held her motionless. Ruth had died doing this. Died in this very house, in a room down the hall, trying to bring life into the world. What if Vivian died too? What if the baby died? What if Will's final victory was claiming a child that would never know its mother? The next contraction was stronger, strong enough to make her gasp, strong enough to override fear with necessity. "Joe," she called, her voice surprisingly steady. "Joe, I need you." The housekeeper appeared so quickly she must have been awake already. One look at Vivian's face told her everything. How far apart? 7 minutes, maybe less. First babies take their time, we've got hours yet. But Joe's hands were already moving, efficient and sure. "I'll get water heating. Wake the men. You stay put and breathe." "Joe," Vivian caught her wrist. "What if something goes wrong?" The older woman's face softened. "Then we'll handle it. But nothing's going wrong. You hear me? I've birthed 23 babies in my lifetime. Never lost a mother yet. Don't intend to start with you." After Joe left, Vivian dressed in a loose nightgown and tried to walk. Movement was supposed to help, she'd heard, but walking felt impossible when her entire body was preparing to tear itself apart. She made it to the window. Outside, the world was painted in shades of gray and white. Beautiful, indifferent. The sun would rise whether she survived this or not. The thought was oddly comforting. Another contraction hit, harder this time. She gripped the windowsill, breathing through it, like Joe had taught her weeks ago when they'd talked about what to expect. When it passed, she found Hank in the doorway. He looked terrified. "Joe said," she said, "it's time." "It's time." Vivian tried to smile to ease the panic in his eyes. "Don't look so scared. Women do this every day." Ruth did it. She didn't survive. The raw honesty in his voice cut through her own fear. Hank wasn't just worried about her. He was reliving the worst day of his life. "I'm not Ruth," Vivian said gently, "and this baby isn't breech." Joe checked. "Everything is positioned right. Normal. I'll be fine." "You can't know that." "No, but I can believe it. And so can you." She crossed to him, slow and ungainly, with her swollen belly. "Hank, I need you to be strong. Can you do that?" He swallowed hard, then nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay. Don't run away like you did before. Stay with me through this." His eyes widened. "Vivian, I can't. It's not proper for a man to—" "You're my husband. This is your child legally. You have every right to be here." Another contraction started building. She squeezed his hand hard. "Please, I don't want to do this alone." The contraction peaked, Vivian bent forward, breathing through gritted teeth. Hank's arm came around her shoulders, supporting her weight steady and solid. When it passed, she looked up to find his face set with determination. "I'll stay," he said. "Every moment, I promise." By noon, the contractions were 4 minutes apart. The bedroom had become a battlefield. Joe commanded from the center, directing Hank to fetch more water, more towels, more of everything. Sam hovered outside the door, his face pale, offering help that no one needed, but everyone appreciated. And Vivian labored. Hours blurred together. Pain became her entire world. Between contractions, she rested. During them, she gripped Hank's hand hard enough to leave marks and tried not to scream. She mostly succeeded. "You're doing wonderfully," Joe said, checking her progress for what felt like the 100th time. "Won't be long now." "You said that an hour ago." "And I was right. It won't be long. Babies come on their own schedule, not ours." Another contraction built. Vivian felt it rising like a wave, unstoppable and overwhelming. This one was different, sharper, more insistent. "Something's wrong," she gasped. Joe's hands moved quickly, checking, assessing. Her face went carefully neutral. The babies turned, not breech, but not quite right either. Hank's grip on Vivian's hand tightened. "What does that mean?" "Means I need to turn it back. Vivian, this is going to hurt more than anything so far. I'm sorry." It did hurt worse than anything Vivian had ever experienced, worse than Will's fists, worse than walking through the blizzard, worse than every pain in her life combined into one moment of agony. She screamed. Finally, completely, she screamed and felt the baby shift, felt everything click into place. "There," Joe said, satisfaction in her voice. "That's better. Now we can work." But Hank had gone white. His hands shook. His breathing came too fast. Vivian recognized the signs. He was back in this room 2 years ago, back with Ruth, back in the moment he'd lost everything. "Henry," she used his full name, sharp and commanding. "Look at me." His eyes focused on her face. "I'm still here. I'm alive. This is different. Do you understand?" He nodded, but she could see him slipping away into panic. "Then prove it. Talk to me. Tell me something. Anything. Keep me here." "I don't. What should I? Tell me about the ranch. Tell me about your plans for spring. Tell me about anything except what's happening right now." He latched onto the lifeline she'd thrown. "The south pasture. We're going to expand it. Sam found good grazing land beyond the creek. If we can negotiate with the neighbor, we could run twice as many cattle by fall." Another contraction. Vivian bore down, pushing when Joe told her to push, breathing when Joe told her to breathe. Hank kept talking. "The house needs repairs, the roof on the east side, and the barn could use a fresh coat of paint. Red, probably. Traditional. Push, breathe, push. I want to build a school for ranch hands' children, teach them reading and arithmetic, give them chances we never had." The pain was incredible. Vivian felt like her body was being torn in half. And a proper library. Books for everyone. Ruth always wanted that. Said education was the difference between surviving and living. "Stop talking about Ruth," Vivian gasped. "Talk about us, about our future." "Our future." The words hung in the air, significant and strange. "Our future," Hank repeated slowly. I want to teach our daughter to ride, to read, to be strong and smart and unafraid." "Our daughter," Vivian managed a weak smile. "How do you know it's a girl?" "I don't, but I hope. Girls are tougher than boys. They have to be." "One more push," Joe commanded. "One big one. You can do this, Vivian. One more." Vivian pushed with everything she had left, pushed past pain, past fear, past the point where her body said it was impossible. And then cutting through everything, a sound, a cry, high and furious and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Joe announced, her voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful, healthy baby girl." The world stopped. Vivian fell back against the pillows, her body shaking with exhaustion and relief. Beside her, Hank made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Joe cleaned the baby with practiced efficiency, then placed the tiny, screaming bundle on Vivian's chest. She was perfect, red-faced and angry with a shock of dark hair and eyes that hadn't quite decided what color they'd be. 10 fingers, 10 toes. Lungs that worked extraordinarily well. "Hello," Vivian whispered. "Hello, little one." The baby stopped crying. Her unfocused eyes seemed to find Vivian's face, and in that moment, everything else fell away. Will, the legal battles, the uncertain future, none of it mattered. This tiny person mattered, this life she'd carried and protected and brought into the world against all odds. "What will you name her?" Joe asked softly. Vivian looked at Hank. His face was wet with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. His hand reached out tentative to touch the baby's tiny fist. When those miniature fingers wrapped around his thumb, he broke completely. "Hope," Vivian said. "Her name is Hope." "Hope Ruth Dalton," Hank added, his voice rough, "if that's acceptable to you." Ruth, the wife he'd lost, the ghost that had haunted this house for 2 years. Vivian thought about refusing, about jealousy and complicated feelings. Then she looked at Hank's face, saw the healing there, and understood. This wasn't about replacing Ruth. It was about honoring her, about acknowledging that love didn't end with death. It transformed into something else, something that could coexist with new love, new life. "Hope Ruth Dalton," Vivian agreed. "It's perfect." The days after Hope's birth passed in a blur of feeding and sleeping and learning how to be a mother. Joe proved invaluable, guiding Vivian through everything with the patience of someone who'd done this many times before. How to nurse, how to swaddle, how to interpret different cries and know what they meant. Sam appeared regularly with gifts: a carved wooden rattle, a soft blanket his mother had sent from Mexico, flowers that he placed awkwardly on the bedside table with mumbled congratulations. And Hank transformed. The grief that had weighted him for 2 years seemed to lift. He still mourned Ruth, probably always would, but now joy had room to exist alongside sorrow. He held Hope with the careful reverence of someone handling something infinitely precious. Talked to her in low murmurs about horses and cattle and the ranch she'd inherit someday. "You're good with her," Vivian observed one evening, watching him rock the baby while she slept. "I'm terrified of her," he admitted. "But in a good way, the kind of terror that makes you want to be better. You're already better. You saved us both. You saved yourselves. I just provided the address." 3 days after the birth, Sheriff Wade arrived with news. Hank met him at the door, his expression wary. "Sheriff? Mr. Dalton, I heard congratulations are in order." "Word travels fast. Always does." Wade shifted uncomfortably. "I'm here on official business, about William Brennan." Every muscle in Hank's body tensed. "What about him?" "He's filed a complaint, claims you're keeping his wife and child from him unlawfully. He's demanding visitation rights. As the father, he's got legal standing." "He's not the father, not legally. Vivian is my wife. The baby is mine." "According to Brennan, your marriage isn't valid. He's pushing for a hearing, wants a judge to determine which marriage takes precedence." Hank's jaw clenched. "When?" 3 weeks. Judge Morrison is riding circuit. He'll hear the case in Copper Ridge Courthouse. And until then, Brennan is staying in town. I've warned him to keep his distance, but legally I can't stop him from being in public spaces. If Mrs. Dalton comes to town, he might approach her." "Then she won't come to town." Wade nodded slowly. "Mr. Dalton, can I speak plainly? Please." "I don't like William Brennan. Something about him sets my teeth on edge, but he's a lawman from another territory. His paperwork is in order. Unless you can prove abuse or fraud or something concrete, the law might side with him. Reverend Gray has medical records, documentation of injuries. That helps. But you'll need more: witnesses, testimony, something that proves beyond doubt that Vivian was in danger." Wade paused. "Do you have that?" Hank thought about Vivian's terror when Will appeared, about the bruises Joe had found, about a woman so desperate she'd walked into a blizzard rather than stay with her husband. "We'll get it," he said, "whatever it takes." After Wade left, Hank climbed the stairs to find Vivian nursing Hope in the rocking chair by the window. The sight of them together, mother and child bathed in afternoon light, made his chest tight. She looked up when he entered. "I heard voices. Was that the sheriff? Yes, Will wants a hearing, claims paternal rights to Hope." Vivian's arms tightened around the baby. "He can't have her." "I know, and he won't. But Vivian, we need to prepare. Need to build a case strong enough that no judge could rule in his favor." "How?" "Testimony from you about what he did, what he threatened, everything you've been afraid to say." Fear flickered across her face. "If I testify, I'll have to see him, face him in court. You'll face him with me beside you, with Joe, with Sam, with Reverend Gray and Agnes and everyone who's seen what you've survived." Hank crossed to her, kneeling beside the rocking chair. "You're not alone anymore. You don't have to be afraid." "I'm always afraid. Fear doesn't just stop because I want it to." "Then we'll be afraid together, but we'll fight anyway." Vivian looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms. This tiny person who'd changed everything, who'd given her a reason to be brave when bravery seemed impossible. "All right," she said finally. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything." 2 days later, a visitor arrived who changed everything. Hank was in the barn when he heard an unfamiliar horse. He emerged to find a woman dismounting, her traveling clothes dusty, her face weary. "Can I help you?" he called. The woman turned. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair and eyes that held old sorrow. "I'm looking for Vivian Brennan. I was told she might be here." Every protective instinct Hank possessed flared to life. "Who's asking?" "My name is Elizabeth Chen. I was—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "I was William Brennan's first wife." The world tilted. First wife. Hank stared at this stranger who'd just spoken impossible words. "What did you say?" "William Brennan married me in Denver 5 years ago. We lived together for 2 years before he—" She stopped composing herself. "Before he became violent. I ran. Changed my name. Tried to disappear." "If you were married, then Vivian's marriage to him would be—" "Invalid." "Yes, he's a bigamist. I have the marriage certificate, the documentation. I came as soon as I heard he was trying to claim another wife and child." Hank's mind raced. If Will's marriage to Vivian was invalid, then she'd never been legally bound to him. Every claim Will had made was built on fraud. "Why now? Why come forward after all this time?" Elizabeth's expression hardened. "Because I read about the hearing, about a woman fighting to keep her child from him. I couldn't let him do to her what he did to me. I couldn't stay silent anymore." "What did he do to you?" "The same thing he did to Vivian, I imagine. Charmed me, married me, then slowly revealed what he really was. A man who sees women as property, who uses law and society's rules to maintain control." Her hands clenched. "I escaped with my life, barely. I won't let him take another woman's." "Does he know you're alive?" "He thinks I died in a fire. I let him think that. It was the only way to be free." Hank studied her, saw truth in her eyes, saw the same haunted expression Vivian wore when she thought no one was watching. "Come inside," he said. "There's someone you need to meet." The confrontation happened in the parlor. Vivian sat on the sofa, Hope sleeping in her arms, her face pale, as Elizabeth Chen explained everything. 2 wives, both lied to, both abused, both convinced they were at fault for their husband's violence. "I'm sorry," Elizabeth said when she finished. "I know this is a shock." "A shock!" Vivian's laugh was slightly hysterical. "You've just told me my entire marriage was a lie, that every moment of the past 3 years was built on fraud. That's somewhat beyond shocking. It means you were never legally his wife. He has no claim to you or your child. It also means I've been living as Vivian Brennan under false pretenses, that the inheritance my father left me, the money Will claimed was his, all of it. Was always yours. He had no legal right to any of it." Elizabeth leaned forward. "Don't you see he married you for your money? just like he married me for mine. We were marks, nothing more." The words should have hurt. Instead, they were liberating. Vivian had spent 3 years believing she'd failed as a wife, that if she'd been better, kinder, more obedient, Will wouldn't have hurt her. Now she understood. Nothing she could have done would have mattered. She'd never been a wife. She'd been a victim. "The hearing," Hank said. "If Elizabeth testifies, Will's case falls apart," Reverend Gray finished. He'd been called over the moment Elizabeth arrived. A bigamist has no standing to claim paternal rights. The court would nullify everything. "He'll fight back," Vivian warned. "Will doesn't lose gracefully." "Then we'll fight harder." Elizabeth's voice was steel. "I've been hiding for 3 years, running, afraid he'd find me. But I'm done being afraid. If testifying destroys him, good. He deserves destruction." The two women looked at each other, two survivors of the same monster, connected by violence, but choosing connection through courage. "Thank you," Vivian said quietly, "for coming forward, for risking yourself. We protect each other. That's what survivors do." That evening, after Elizabeth had been settled in the guest room and Hope had been fed and put to bed, Hank found Vivian standing at the study window. She wasn't crying. Her face was calm, almost peaceful. "How are you?" he asked. "Free." She turned to him and her eyes were clear. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel free. The marriage was a lie, which means I wasn't a failed wife. I was just trapped. And now, I'm not. The hearing is still happening. Will could still cause trouble. Let him try. With Elizabeth's testimony, he has nothing. No legal standing, no moral authority, just anger and pride in the knowledge that he lost. You're not worried. I'm terrified, but I'm also done letting fear control me." She crossed to him, this man who'd saved her, married her, stood beside her through everything. "Hank, when this is over, when Will is really gone, I want to talk. About us. About what this marriage could be." His breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want a real marriage, not an arrangement, not protection, a partnership, a life together, if you want that too." The vulnerability in her eyes nearly undid him. "Vivian, I've wanted that since the moment I married you, maybe even before, but I didn't want to push, didn't want you to feel obligated." "I don't feel obligated. I feel—" She searched for words. "I feel like I've been given a second chance at everything, at life, at happiness, at love, and I don't want to waste it." Hank closed the distance between them. His hands cupped her face, gentle and reverent. "Then we won't waste it. When this is over, we'll do everything right, court properly, build something real. Promise, I promise." They stood together in the quiet study, the future spreading before them bright with possibility. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside, Dalton Ranch spring was already coming. The hearing took place on a gray February morning. The Copper Ridge courthouse was packed. News of the bigamy revelation had spread like wildfire. Everyone wanted to witness William Brennan's downfall. Vivian sat at the front, Hope in her arms, Hank on one side, and Elizabeth on the other. Behind them, Joe, Sam, Agnes, and half the town who'd come to support her. Across the aisle, Will sat alone. His lawyer had abandoned him when the bigamy evidence surfaced. His charm had failed him. For the first time, he looked what he was, a small, cruel man facing consequences. Judge Morrison presided with grim efficiency. He'd seen the evidence, read the testimonies, examined Elizabeth's marriage certificate. "Mr. Brennan," the judge said, his voice heavy with disgust, "you stand accused of bigamy, fraud, and conspiracy to deprive a woman of her legal rights. How do you plead?" Will stood. His face was a mask of rage, barely contained. "This is a conspiracy. These women are lying. These women have documentation. You have excuses." Morrison cut him off. "Your marriage to Vivian Brennan is hereby declared null and void. It never legally existed. You have no claim to her, her child, or her property." "That baby is mine. That baby," the judge said coldly, "belongs to her mother and the man who married her legally. You have no parental rights, no visitation, no contact. If you approach Mrs. Dalton or her child, you will be arrested for harassment." Will's control finally shattered. He lunged toward Vivian, his face twisted with hate. "You think you've won? You think this is over? Hank was faster. He stepped between them, his presence a wall. Behind him, Sam moved to protect Vivian and Hope. "Don't," Hank said quietly. "Don't give me a reason." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Will froze, seeing something in Hank's eyes that even his rage couldn't overcome. Sheriff Wade and his deputy moved in, restraining Will. "William Brennan," Morrison continued, "you are hereby sentenced to 3 years in territorial prison for bigamy and fraud. You will serve your time in Denver, and when you're released, you are permanently banned from Montana territory." They dragged Will away, his curses echoing through the courthouse until distance and closed doors silenced them. In the sudden quiet, Vivian realized she was shaking, not from fear, from relief so intense it felt like flight. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." Elizabeth took her hand, squeezed gently. "It's over." The 2 women who'd survived the same monster smiled at each other, then spontaneously they laughed. Great gasping laughs of relief and victory and freedom finally claimed. Hope woke and added her voice to the noise, not crying but cooing, as if she knew this was a moment for celebration. And the entire courthouse broke into applause. Spring came to Montana territory in stages. First, the snow melted. Then tentative green appeared in sheltered valleys. Birds returned. The world remembered how to be beautiful. At Dalton Ranch, other transformations occurred. Elizabeth stayed. With nowhere else to go and a friendship forged in shared survival, she became part of the household. She helped Joe with cooking, taught Vivian techniques for managing the ranch books, and slowly began to heal. Hope grew. Fat and happy, she filled the house with cries and coos and the peculiar magic that babies brought to every space they inhabited. And Hank and Vivian, freed from the threat of Will, began the careful dance of actually falling in love. Not the desperate love born of crisis. Real love, built on daily kindnesses and shared laughter and 1,000 small moments that added up to something enduring. 3 months after the hearing, on a warm April evening, Hank found Vivian in the garden she'd started planting. She looked up, dirt on her hands, joy on her face. "Look, the first shoots, carrots, I think, or maybe radishes. I can't remember which I planted where." "Vivian Grace Dalton," he said formally. She stood brushing off her hands. "That's quite a serious tone. Am I in trouble?" "The opposite." He pulled a small box from his pocket. "We got married in crisis, for protection, for legal standing, for everything except what marriage should be about." "Hank." "Let me finish." He opened the box to reveal a ring, simple gold with a small diamond, nothing extravagant, perfect. "I want to marry you again, properly, with courting and romance and all the things we skipped the first time. Will you let me?" Tears gathered in her eyes. "We're already married." "Legally, but I want more than legal. I want," he struggled for words, "I want to marry you because I love you, because I can't imagine my life without you. Because when I think about the future, you're in every version of it. You love me, completely, impossibly. From probably the moment you woke up in my guest room and demanded to earn your keep." He took her dirty hand in his clean one. "So will you marry me again the right way?" Vivian's smile could have lit the entire territory. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It caught the sunset, throwing tiny rainbows across the garden. Then he kissed her. Finally. After months of restraint and careful distance, he kissed his wife like he meant it, and she kissed him back. When they broke apart, both breathless, Vivian laughed. "We're doing this backwards. Usually the kiss comes before the second proposal." "Nothing about us has been usual." "True, but I wouldn't change any of it. Even the hard parts brought us here. To a garden full of vegetables you can't identify. To a home. To family. To love worth fighting for." From the house, Joe's voice called them for dinner. They walked back together hand in hand, already planning the wedding that would celebrate what they'd become rather than what they'd needed to survive. The second wedding of Hank and Vivian Dalton took place in June when Montana was at its most beautiful. This time, they didn't rush, didn't hide, didn't marry in crisis. They married in joy. The ceremony was held in the meadow beyond the north pasture under the oak tree where Ruth and her baby were buried, not as a replacement, but as a blessing. The past and future existing together without conflict. Half the territory came. Agnes Hartford officiated with Reverend Gray's blessing, her tiny voice carrying surprising authority. Jo stood as matron of honor, her gray eyes wet with happy tears. Sam served as best man, his ribs fully healed, his reading improving daily thanks to Vivian's patient teaching. Elizabeth held Hope, who'd been dressed by Jo in a gown made from the same fabric as Vivian's dress. Blue, the color of sky and possibility. And Vivian walked toward Hank, wearing wildflowers in her hair and a smile that made his heart stop. When they reached the oak tree, Agnes began. "We gather today to witness what we've all known for months. These two people love each other, have fought for each other, have built something beautiful from something broken." She paused, looking at both of them. "The first time you married, it was necessity. Today it's choice. That's what makes this real." The vows they'd written together reflected everything they'd survived to reach this moment. Hank spoke first, his deep voice steady. "Vivian, you walked into my life through a door I thought I'd closed forever. You taught me that grief doesn't mean the end of joy. That second chances are real, that love doesn't replace love, it multiplies it. I promise to be the husband you deserve, the father Hope needs, and the partner you can rely on, in crisis and in calm, in winter and in spring, always." Vivian's response came from her heart. "Hank, you saved me. Not just from the storm, not just from Will, but from giving up on myself. You saw strength in me when I saw only weakness. You offered shelter when the world offered judgment. I promise to build a life with you worth the fight it took to get here. I promise to love Ruth's memory by loving you. And I promise that our door will always be open to those who need mercy. Because you taught me what mercy means." They exchanged rings. The ones from their first wedding had served their purpose. These new bands represented something different, something chosen. "By the power of love and commitment and community," Agnes declared, "I pronounce you husband and wife, again, for real this time. Now kiss her properly, Henry, before I have to tell you twice." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Hank grinned and pulled Vivian close, kissing her thoroughly while everyone cheered. When they finally broke apart, Hope let out a shriek of baby laughter, perfectly timed. "Even she approves," Elizabeth called out, and everyone laughed again. The celebration lasted into evening. Tables laden with food appeared as if by magic, courtesy of every woman in 3 townships who'd insisted on contributing. Music played. Children ran wild. Adults danced and drank and celebrated love hard-won. As sunset painted the sky gold and pink, Hank pulled Vivian away from the crowd. "Come with me. I have something to show you." He led her to the house, up the stairs to the room that had been Ruth's nursery, and then nothing. But now it was something again. The walls had been painted soft yellow. New curtains hung at the windows. A crib stood in the corner made by Hank's own hands. Books lined a shelf. Toys waited to be played with. "Hope's room," Vivian breathed. "When did you—" "Over the past month, with Sam's help, and Jo's opinions, and Elizabeth's eye for color." He wrapped his arms around her from behind his chin, resting on her shoulder. "I wanted her to have a space of her own, not a ghost's room, her room." Tears streamed down Vivian's face. "It's perfect." "There's more." He led her to the window. Outside in the meadow, visible from this vantage, a new building was taking shape, foundation laid, walls beginning to rise. "What is that?" "A shelter. For women like you, like Elizabeth, women who need a safe place to run to." His arms tightened around her. "We're calling it the Mercy Door, because our door opened for you. Now we'll keep it open for others." Vivian turned in his arms, her face wet, her smile incandescent. "You did this for me. I did this for us, for the future we're building, for every woman who needs to know that mercy exists." She kissed him, then pouring everything she felt into it. Gratitude and love and hope for all the tomorrows they'd create together. When they returned to the celebration, hand in hand, they found Sam teaching Hope her first words in Spanish. The baby gurgled happily, her tiny fists waving. "She's brilliant," Sam announced. "Already understands everything I'm saying." "She's 6 months old," Joe pointed out. "She understands nothing. She understands love. That's everything." The simple truth of it silenced them all. 1 year later, on a spring evening much like the one when she'd first arrived, Vivian stood at the door of the Mercy Door shelter. The building was complete now. 6 rooms, a kitchen, a common area, space for women and children to heal in safety. Today their first resident was arriving. Vivian watched the figure approach through the twilight. Young, pregnant, moving with the desperate determination of someone who'd run out of options. When the woman reached the porch, Vivian saw her clearly, bruises fading on her face, fear in her eyes, hope warring with despair. "Please," the woman whispered. "I was told someone said you help women like me." Vivian thought about standing in this same position a year ago, about 19 doors that had closed before one finally opened. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "You're safe here." The woman's sob of relief was visceral. She crossed the threshold, and Vivian closed the door behind her, not locking her in, creating sanctuary. "What's your name?" Vivian asked gently. "Sarah? Sarah Mitchell." Sarah, like Ruth's middle name, like a circle completing. "I'm Vivian Dalton. This is the Mercy Door. We'll help you. Food, shelter, legal assistance, whatever you need." "I can't pay." "We don't charge. We just help." Vivian led her inside where a fire burned warm and welcoming. "Have you eaten?" "Not in 2 days." "Then we'll start there. Joe, our cook, makes the best stew in Montana." As if summoned, Joe appeared from the kitchen, took one look at Sarah, and immediately went into mother mode. "Sit, eat. You're skin and bones, girl." While Joe fussed over their new guest, Vivian slipped outside. The main house was visible across the meadow lights glowing in every window. Through one window she could see Hank playing with Hope, swinging their daughter in the air while she shrieked with laughter. Elizabeth appeared beside her, carrying blankets for Sarah. "Another one saved," she said quietly. "One at a time. That's all we can do. One at a time adds up. We've helped 5 women in 3 months. 5 women who might have died otherwise. 5 children who'll grow up knowing they're worth protecting." Vivian smiled. Not bad for a year's work. Inside the shelter, Sarah was eating like she'd never tasted food before. Joe sat with her, speaking in low, comforting tones. Through the window, Vivian could see the exact moment Sarah realized she was truly safe. The way her shoulders relaxed, the way tears started flowing. "You should go home," Elizabeth said. "Hank and Hope will want you for bedtime." "What about Sarah?" "I'll stay tonight. Sit with her. Make sure she knows she's not alone." Vivian squeezed Elizabeth's hand. "Thank you for everything, for staying, for helping build this. Thank you for showing me it was possible to survive, to thrive, to turn pain into purpose." As Vivian walked back to the main house, she looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Will Brennan was serving his sentence, learning that actions had consequences, that women weren't property. She hoped he was miserable, but mostly she didn't think about him at all. Inside the main house, Hank looked up when she entered. "How's our new guest?" "Settling in. Elizabeth is staying with her tonight." "Good." He shifted Hope to one arm and pulled Vivian close with the other. "I was thinking about expanding, adding another building. Space for more women. Already we just opened. The need is there. Agnes says she knows 3 women in Copper Ridge alone who could use help, and there's word from other territories, women asking if they can come here. Vivian leaned into him, breathing in the scent of home. Then we'll expand. We'll help everyone we can. Hope reached for her mother, babbling something that might have been mama or might have been nonsense. Vivian took her, nuzzling the soft baby hair. She's getting so big, she marveled. She takes after her mother, strong, stubborn, beautiful. Flatterer, truth-teller. Joe appeared in the doorway, Sam behind her. The ranch hand had become a permanent fixture at family dinners, his reading now good enough that he helped keep the Mercy Doors books. "Dinner in 10 minutes, Joe announced. "And Sam made dessert. You made dessert?" Vivian's eyebrows rose. Sam grinned. "Joe taught me. Apple pie. Might be terrible, but I tried." They gathered around the table, this makeshift family built from broken pieces. Joe and her long-delayed motherhood, Sam and his hard-won literacy, Elizabeth and her reclaimed life, Hope and her innocent joy, and Hank and Vivian, 2 people who'd found each other in the darkest season and built something bright. Before they ate, Hank raised his glass. "A toast to family, to second chances, to mercy that never closes its door, to the Mercy Door," they echoed. Glasses clinked. Laughter filled the room. Hope banged her spoon on the table, adding her own percussion to the celebration. Outside, night fell soft and complete. In the shelter across the meadow, Sarah Mitchell slept peacefully for the first time in months. Tomorrow she'd begin the hard work of healing. But tonight she was safe. And that was everything. 5 years later, the Mercy Door had grown beyond anyone's expectations. 3 buildings now, capacity for 20 women and children, a full staff, funding from donors across 3 territories, and a reputation that brought desperate women from as far as California. Vivian managed it all with the same efficiency she'd once applied to Hank's ranch books, but now instead of hiding money from an abuser, she was allocating resources to save lives. The main house had changed too. Hope had a little brother now, Thomas James, born 2 years after his sister, and another sibling was on the way, due in the fall. "You're building your own town," Agnes Hartford observed one afternoon, watching Vivian supervise construction of a 4th shelter building. "Just providing what should already exist: safety, dignity, choice. You've helped over 100 women in 5 years, and there are thousands more who still need help. We're barely making a dent. A dent is more than nothing, and every woman you save saves countless others. Her children grow up knowing violence isn't normal. They break the cycle. That's legacy." Vivian placed a hand on her rounded belly, feeling the baby kick. "I want my children to grow up in a world where places like the Mercy Door aren't necessary, where women aren't property, where mercy is the rule, not the exception. Then you're building that world, one door at a time." That evening, as Vivian prepared for bed, she found Hank at the window of their bedroom. The same window where she'd stood on her first night watching snow fall and wondering if she'd survive. "What are you thinking?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "About how different everything is. 5 years ago, this house was a tomb. Now it's—" He gestured to where Hope and Thomas slept in the adjoining room. "Now it's alive. Regrets, not a single one. You—" She thought about everything she'd survived to reach this moment. The abuse, the flight, the terror of not knowing if she'd live to see her baby born. Not one, she confirmed. Well, maybe one small regret. "What's that?" "That I didn't find you sooner." He turned in her arms, his face soft in the lamplight. After 5 years of marriage, 2 of them real, he still looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd never known to ask. "We found each other exactly when we were meant to," he said. "Not a moment sooner or later. Romantic. Practical. You taught me that." They stood together watching the stars appear one by one. In the distance, lights glowed from the Mercy Door buildings. Each light represented a woman finding safety, a child learning they were worth protecting. Legacy built from mercy. "Come to bed," Vivian said finally. "Tomorrow we have that meeting with the territorial governor about funding." "Tomorrow, but tonight." Hank pulled her close. "Tonight we're just us. A family. Together." And that, Vivian thought as she settled into her husband's arms, was the greatest mercy of all. Not just surviving, but living, thriving, building something beautiful from the ashes of what had tried to destroy her. The door had opened, and it would never close. Epilogue. The portrait hung in the main hall of the Mercy Doors Administrative Building. Not a professional piece, just a simple photograph taken by a traveling photographer in the summer of 1890. Hank and Vivian stood in the center surrounded by their 4 children. Hope tall and serious at 9. Thomas grinning at 7. The twins Ruth and Grace matching mischief at 4. Behind them Joe and Sam Gray now, but still vital. Elizabeth married to Reverend Gray after a courtship that had surprised no one. Agnes Hartford tiny and fierce even at 70, and around the family arranged like a frame 32 women, the residents of the Mercy Door on that particular day, survivors who'd found sanctuary and stayed to help others find the same. Below the photograph, a plaque, "The Mercy Door, founded 1885, in memory of all those who knocked and for all those who still need a door to open." Visitors to the shelter always stopped at this photograph, always asked about the people in it. And the current director, one of the first women Vivian had helped, always told the same story. About a pregnant woman who'd collapsed in a blizzard. About a cowboy who'd chosen mercy over safety. About love hard won and a legacy built on the simple truth that everyone deserves a door that opens instead of slams. The story never got old, because it wasn't just history, it was hope. And hope, like mercy, never closes its door. A note on the Mercy Door. The Mercy Door shelter operated in Montana Territory from 1885 until 1947, when its mission was absorbed into larger social service systems. During its 62 years of operation, it provided refuge to over 1,200 women and children. The original buildings still stand on what is now the Dalton Ranch Heritage Site. The 4th-generation Dalton family maintains the property as a museum and educational center focusing on women's history in the American West. Vivian Dalton's journals and correspondence are preserved in the Montana Historical Society archives. They remain required reading in many women's studies programs. Hope Dalton became the territory's first female judge. Thomas Dalton expanded the family ranch into one of the largest in the state. The twins, Ruth and Grace, founded the Western Women's Legal Defense Fund. Henry Dalton lived to be 81. When asked about his life's greatest achievement, he always gave the same answer: opening the door. Some doors once opened never truly close.